It's night, but I can't stay asleep. But you do, straight through till morning, when you pour my coffee and say, baby, this is Columbia House Party.
Damn.
Episode 10. Jake, what's going on, buddy?
Not much. That's awesome. We should do like a bonus episode where it's just Blake reading
First lyrics of
albums and trying to fit our podcast name in.
When you get to Conor Oberst and we're trying to make these connections, you can go 100 different ways. The dude has been
prolific
in a lot of different groups. We're going to save what he's best known for another time. I'm sure it's going to come up though. I have takes. I have Bright Eyes takes.
Everyone has Bright Eyes takes.
And I think we touched on this before, but it's like when we did the My Chemical Romance episode and the response was kind of, wow, nobody realizes that My Chemical Romance was so popular at the time. It feels like no one admitted to it at the time. And now everyone's like, oh yeah, I really liked My Chemical Romance. Well, now Bright Eyes is the opposite, where like everyone listened to a lot of Bright Eyes and you don't hear a lot of people now be like, oh yeah, I listened to so much Bright Eyes. Now,
everyone listened to Bright Eyes.
There is a small portion of very passionate people who will tell you nonstop that they listen to Bright Eyes, which is cool. Stan who you got to stan, and Conor Oberst is not the worst person in the world to stan if you're going to go to town for someone's music. We're not talking about Bright Eyes today, though. We're not talking about most of the 4 dozen Conor Oberst projects out there. Not even talking about one of my favorites, Better Oblivion Community Center. Today, we're talking about Desaparecidos. Jake, who are Desaparecidos?
Desaparecidos, which is Spanish for the disappeared ones, in case anyone was curious. Desaparecidos was a side project started by Conor Oberst in 2002, right as Bright Eyes was sort of blowing up. And I came across them because obviously I was a Bright Eyes fan because I was a sad boy. But as we've touched on hundreds of times, if not thousands by episode 10.
Millions.
I loved my punk and my emos the most. So whenever Digital Ash came out, I had gone to see Bright Eyes on the Digital Ash tour with Nick Zinner. They played at the Docks when it was still just called the Docks.
Oh man.
It was a great show. And then I went with my friend Mark, who was a friend of mine in high school. And then one day at school, he told me that Conor Oberst has a punk band. And I said, what? Because I had never heard of this album before. And he gave me a copy of the album we're going to talk about today. And I think I listened to it. So, remember when you used to listen to CDs so much, they would start to just not work?
Yeah.
I listened to this album so much in high school. It definitely was a album that, for a insufferable political child, spoke to a lot of things that I didn't really have words for because it kind of,
because you were so right wing.
Yes. yeah. But I mean, I think it's an interesting album in the sense that, and we'll get into this, but in the sense like a lot of albums at this time were, quote unquote political, but they're all very straightforward. It was just like Bush is bad, war is bad.
In the aftermath of 9/11.
Oh, if you think we're not talking about 9/11 today, I'm sorry, but you're mistaken.
We're going to have to get a drop at some point of just like a news anchor. In the aftermath of 9/11.
But this album sort of spoke about like financials and gentrification and urban sprawl and, fun topics for an album. But I love the shit out of this album. I think it's aged reasonably well, but I think they're not a band that gets talked about a lot, unfortunately. So we're going to do that today. So this is Read Music, Speak Spanish by Desaparecidos.
So you know how Superman hops into the phone booth?
Yeah.
And like Clark Kent he's hiding in plain sight. Everyone knows that, or everyone should know anyway that he's Superman. All he does is take off his glasses. He hops in the phone booth to do that. To make this album, I imagine Conor Oberst hopping into a phone booth and just swooping his bangs from left to right to left. He's like, okay, I was an emo boy and now, not emo.
Not emo.
I was a sad indie folk boy. I don't want I don't want those our emo
Our emo's coming for you.
He just swipes his bangs from left to right to left to become, because the aesthetic wasn't too much different in the early 2000s.
Not at all.
So he just changes the direction of the bang and he's like, oh, I'm punk rock Conor now.
It's punk time. This album came out in 2002, and it kind of came out in an interesting time in sort of the arc of Conor Oberst. Bright Eyes released Fevers and Mirrors in 2000, and that's sort of... Oberst has been releasing music since he was like 13 years old, which was his sort of first claim. Which is crazy. It was sort of his first claim to fame was how much music this kid was releasing and the quality of it.
I knew that about him, but then researching this, and I'm like, he's not that much older than me, and he's been making music for 25 years.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Man.
He would release As Bright Eyes, Fevers and Mirrors in 2000, sort of broke him through a little bit, got trashed by Pitchfork, so it was a good emo album that they then gave a 9 to like 20 years later. He was 20 years old when Fears and Mirrors was released. And so he was definitely gaining popularity and momentum. 6 months after the Desaparecidos record, he would release Lifted, which broke him into huge, massive, ridiculous popularity.
It made Bright Eyes Bright Eyes.
In between that, he released this weird political punk record.
My favorite thing about this is, like, obviously Bright Eyes, if there was any doubt at all whether he was pivoting from a Bright Eyes pathway to Desaparecidos, he told MTV2 in 2002, I have another band I care about way more called Bright Eyes.
Yeah, I think this was always seen as just a fun thing for him to do. We all know Bright Eyes, of course, but just for fun, because it's a good song, let's take a listen to what he was sounding like in 2002.
There's no beginning to the story. A bookshelf sinks into the sand. And a language learned and forgotten turn is studied once again. It's a shocking bit of footage viewed from a shitty TV screen. You can squint at it through snowy static to make out the meaning, and keep on stretching the antenna, hoping that it will come clear. We need some reception, a higher message. Just tell us what to fear, 'cause I don't know what tomorrow brings. To lie with such possibility, but I won't be frightened when I'm awoken from this dream and return to that which gave birth to me. Give birth to me, give birth to me, give birth to me. Goes, and the story goes, and it goes on and on and on and on. It's going on and on and on and on. It's going on and on and on and on. It's going on and on and on and on. It's going on and on and on and on. It's going on and on and on and on. It's going on and on and on and on.
That song just makes me feel like I'm in high school.
I love Bright Eyes.
Me too. So that's what was happening with Bright Eyes in 2002. But I don't think that this band was quite so out of left field as people think, because before Bright Eyes, Conor Oberst was in a band called Commander Venus, which is not a good name for a band, but it was fronted by himself and Tim Kasher of Cursive, because every band on Saddle Creek was either Oberst or Tim Kasher.
Also, every album you bring has something to do with Cursive. Look, just do the Cursive album already.
We'll get there. Commander Venus was definitely a band fronted by a 14-year-old, is what I would say. Way better than they had any right to be. It was Conor Oberst on guitar and vocals, Tim Kasher on bass, Matt Bowen on drums, and Rob Nansell, who runs Saddle Creek, also on guitar. Tim Kasher was 20 when they started the band. Oberst was 14. Oberst doesn't hold this band in the highest esteem these days, understandably, because who wants their high school band being dissected and recorded?
Who on this podcast might be able to relate to not wanting to be identified by the projects they did when they were 14?
Right. Oberst said that I didn't know how to play with a band at all, and I couldn't even keep time with the drums. In 1995, they released their first album called Do You Feel at Home on Saddle Creek. They would later sign to Grass Records to release The Uneventful Vacation in 1997. I think Commander Venus are really interesting, even if I don't like them that much, because I think you can really hear both Oberst and Kasher's bands sort of where they both came from.
Yeah.
And it's like kind of a blend of both their styles.
Which is probably what a band when you're 14 is supposed to be about. Figuring that out.
And I think it's seeing how both their careers have gone. I just find it a really interesting sort of artifact. They were given $15,000 to record their second album, which went about as well as giving a bunch of 15, 20-year-olds $15,000 would. Oberst said, they bought us a van and sent us on these tours. They had all this money and they didn't know how to run a record label. The new management all came from a major label and they knew nothing about underground music. It was a zoo. They didn't know what was going on and they didn't have the know-how to make something happen. So the recording of that album, not a great time for anybody, it sounds like. Oberst considers the record to be a failure. He said that we wanted to do stuff we weren't prepared to do because I'm not a very good guitar player, and that was always my biggest problem. And the entire album also had to be recorded in Oberst's summer vacation because, again, he was in high school. The record was actually quite well received, and they were sort of propped up as being the next big Omaha band. They were going to break through with Saddle Creek and make a whole thing. Then they broke up. Oberst said that first Matt quit. He was frustrated. He didn't want to play drums. Then Tim had to make a decision because Cursive was really picking up at the time and he was their main guy. We knew it would come to this point where we'd both be touring at the same time, so he bowed out.
Probably the right decision.
Yeah, I think for everyone's case, not sticking with Commander Venus was the right call. And also, as we will see a lot in this episode, Oberst didn't like being associated with an emo band. He said, it lost its luster and I got fed up with the big emo craze. We got tagged as an emo band right off the bat. A lot of cool bands were playing that style of music. Then a huge number of bands started tagging along, and suddenly everyone was getting thrown in the emo category. These days, I think of emo as a negative term.
So Nothing Feels Good, which the book that I've referenced a couple times here, a common thread throughout it is that as the emo boom is happening, very few bands want to accept being a part of that. And we've joked a bunch of times about how the emo subreddit is very territorial about what classifies and what doesn't. And as much as we joke about it, I do appreciate these people who didn't understand the movement and the genre in the late 90s, early 2000s threw this blanket term at everything that didn't fit anywhere else.
Yes.
And I very much appreciate we need a little bit more structure because you can't just call everything rock.
Right.
And not have separation within those. So I don't necessarily get the degree to which they will defend or argue the definitions, but I certainly appreciate trying to take back some of the definition, being the ones to define your own categories and stuff like that. And so I get why, a lot of the bands would push back against it too, not only because the coverage at that time was treating emo almost like a fad genre, and then you also have things like, well, if you're way over on this right side of what we're blanketing emo and way over on the left, there's something that you don't identify with their sound at all. I get why both people on both sides of that pole or both poles would want to be like, well, I'm not like that. Don't call me emo if that's emo. So I get it. It is a weird kind of moment in history where so much of the discussion of emo around this time is people saying, no, we're not emo.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And then 15 years later, everyone trying to figure out what was and wasn't.
Yeah, I think it's such an odd genre in the sense that no one wanted to be a part of it, but it's also, I think, very much a late 90s, early 2000s thing where everyone didn't want to be called emo because we've sort of talked about this in the My Chemical Romance episode about how being emotional and having these personal songs was a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's we're not that.
And this is the thing is lyrical content wise, there is no arguing that Bright Eyes was influential on the emo movement and definitely fits from a spiritual content. Now, the sound wise doesn't really necessarily fit where emo has gone. It's folk. Yeah. It's sad folk.
Yeah.
And it's emotional folk. But I think he would probably, I didn't see where our emo had it classified, but they have on their sidebar examples of each one, and then a group of, hey, these aren't emo bands, but they're really influential on the genre. I would bet that those people who are really territorial about it would agree that Bright Eyes fits there of hey, there's a big influence on the next 15 to 20 years of emo, but we don't think that Bright Eyes is emo itself.
I think it's regressive to say that emo's not an interesting genre because it's not true.
Yes.
But I do think I can see how a guy who was that young at that time and that successful wanted to do more quote unquote interesting things. He wanted to go make a record and have Emmylou Harris on as a backing singer, which he did. But that's not, no emo band wanted to go and have Emmylou Harris on their record.
No, you get Liza Minnelli.
Exactly. Anyway, Commander Venus break up. Bright Eyes starts taking off. Fevers and Mirrors came out. launched Bright Eyes just before he became the face of the genre almost. One of the most famous emo or not musicians.
He's certainly, if not the face, the bangs of the genre.
Yes. He had the look. He was young. He was the heartthrob, the blah, blah, blah. We all know.
And the songwriting quality is...
So that's what I really find interesting about Desaparecidos.
So yeah, sorry if I'm jumping ahead on you.
No, you're good. Not what I find interesting, but the thing I loved about it was you and I are both lyric guys.
Yeah.
We care about lyrical content. And then I like the lyrical content in Bright Eyes. And then here it's like, oh, I get Conor Oberst's songwriting, but with loud music. This fucking kicks ass. I love this.
Which is why it's crazy to me that I never found Desaparecidos until like a couple years after. Whereas I listened to it back now, and this album absolutely fits in with like the first Taking Back Sunday album and like brand new Figuring Out Their Sound.
Totally.
Like it fits that and everything else that I was listening to even more than Bright Eyes does, really, where Bright Eyes is just like, okay, you're a sad kid.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I just didn't come across it or because it was a little harder to...
It kind of got buried a little bit. Like,
yeah. And like I've mentioned this before, that I didn't really have a lot of friends listening to the same stuff as me. And if I did, they were kind of like online friends, and having online friends was still kind of new at that point. So I didn't have anyone like championing them to me. So yeah, I didn't catch them. I don't know. It was maybe 2005, 2006 before I even knew that this was a thing or recognized that it was a thing.
And I do think that, and we'll get into this a little bit, it sort of got so, like Bright Eyes became so big.
So quickly.
And like right after this came out. He was recording Lifted on the tour for this album. I think it just got buried because Bright Eyes exploded, and then this band broke up.
Well, yeah, and if you're him, which one are you going to tour? Which one are you going to do media for?
Exactly.
Which one are you going to say, hey, I'm Conor Oberst of...
Yes.
You're going to say, I'm Conor Oberst of Bright Eyes
for
because
sure.
This is the thing I care more about, and it's the thing that's doing better too. So
yeah, this record, the sound of it was never going to have mainstream appeal like Bright Eyes did.
No.
Like it wasn't, especially at the time. There's a line in a song on this record that's kind of exactly what we're talking about. It's the first line of a song called Mall of America. So obviously it wasn't murder on his folk career, but I can see where he was concerned about that.
Yeah, it certainly didn't kill his folk career because,
no.
Bright Eyes was the thing. This album, though, looking back now, pretty good and maybe didn't get his due. We're going to talk about Desaparecidos after this.
Okay, to continue with the theme of this podcast, this album was recorded in 1 week. The week it was recorded was the week of September 11th.
In the aftermath of 9/11.
The album almost wasn't released because it's mostly just a harsh criticism of American consumerism for 9 songs. And of course, after 9/11, critiques of America were not exactly super well received. At shows, apparently people would come and protest the band and hand out flyers.
They were big enough to get protested?
I guess. I didn't know
also,
that either.
Is it like a pro-Walmart protest?
I think it was just they were criticizing America, and it was such a gung-ho America time. At one show, someone handed out flyers calling the band Treasonous, which for
light treason.
Some light treason.
Light treason.
Which for a small little punk band just seems like a waste of time to me.
Now, at the same time, for a punk band around that time, a small little punk band around that time, if that stuff was getting publicity, probably not a bad thing
Yes.
for the attention you're
Very
getting.
true. And the band definitely leaned into it.
Yeah, obviously this is the time of within the years that followed the anti-Bush.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this was just a little too close to 9/11 for it to.
Well, also they were
there.
recording it then, so you don't even get to see the response. Like, how could you be critical of something that happened yet?
Exactly.
But it's right around that moment where that became, politics came back to punk rock for a little bit.
And I think the band lead into it too. Denver Daly, who's the guitarist in Desaparecidos,
what a name!
said that. Yeah, great name.
Riverdale last name.
Said every fast food marquee was like, "God bless the USA," and here comes us saying, "God save the USA."
Ooh.
Yeah. This album is sticking to another theme of this podcast. It is a concept record. Conor said that it's a concept album about Omaha, about the white flight to the suburbs and the ever-expanding urban sprawl. And you can hear that. Like, every song on this record is either criticizing gentrification directly or, financial unease or angst.
This is where I like the album most in retrospect. And again, I didn't find it until a little after, but I'm from not a small town. Like, Cambridge has 125,000 people now, roughly.
Yeah.
But at the time I grew up, it was like a large small town. The mall was kind of dinky. Cambridge was originally 3 small towns that merged into one in the 70s, but like still kind of operated as 3 small towns within one.
What did you say the population was?
I think it's like 125,000.
Okay, yeah. So Omaha's only 400,000. So also not a massive place.
Like in Cambridge, the 3 towns that merged were Galt, Preston, and Hespeler.
Okay.
And people, this was like in the 70s, and people still, like, I was from Galt.
Right.
If you're in Cambridge,
right.
Okay, Galt and Hespeler, it was funny. Like, Galt and Preston had their own hockey team, and then Hespeler had their own hockey team. So you'd have some rivalry there. But also, Galt and Hespeler would argue over what the better part of Cambridge is, and Preston was just like off to the side. Preston had a 7-Eleven. That's about it. But it's listening to these lyrics. It's like at the same time, so much of punk and pop punk and emo, like there's always the lamentations of where you're from. Like I hate where I'm from.
Gotta get out of this
I hate being about that. I have to get away from that. But what this album's kind of about is, well, okay, what if the small town you're from or smallish town you're from starts to get bigger and starts to become more of what other towns are, but you also hate that. Like as Cambridge or Omaha grows and gets all these box stores. And so when I was in high school, right down the street from us was a country bar called the Little Bighorn Saloon.
Okay.
I saw Flog and Molly play there one time.
Oh boy.
Yeah. It was the only venue in Cambridge, basically, that anyone could play at. So they just convert the country bar, one night a week or whatever. And I lived down the street, and the agreement was that I could have the car if I dropped my dad off and picked him up after. So like my friends and I would get to go in sometimes because it was the local, and I didn't drink in high school, but I'm not saying that my dad maybe bought drinks for friends of mine, but I'm not saying that also didn't happen. And then like one week it was just a Boston Pizza. And then it's like, oh, the only place to like do anything in Cambridge is now a Boston Pizza, which is, I guess, in the eyes of like the big picture of how you grow a city, it's progress to have chain stores. And
and I think it's also a very prescient album in 2019, because even in Toronto, so much talk consistently about gentrification and about taking these, like you go down Spadina now in Chinatown, and it's all discussion now about taking down these old Chinese restaurants. Rolsan, yeah.
Come on.
Like, it's ridiculous. Or the Pearl Court building.
There's a lot of discussion right now about all the venues in Toronto can't afford, because property taxes is charged based on the highest possible usage of that space. So something like the Horseshoe that's in great real estate gets property tax based on what that could be, not on what it is. And, the province obviously doesn't want to grant anything for that, but the city's trying to come up with tax credits for venues to try to keep that scene alive.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's part of it too, is you lose some of the personality of it. So I find this album, obviously a lot of people from small towns and a lot of bands, anywhere you're from, you hate where you're from, right? At least that comes up in music. Like I think of Wonder Years all the time, how
Constantly.
It's just like every lyric is about how Philly's the worst place in the world and you don't want to go back.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, if the place you're from that you've always hated being from or not, felt it didn't match your identity or whatever, once it starts to change, well, you hate that too. And is it better to be unique and boring, or is it better to be the same as everything else and still kind of boring? It's cool to me that like I had a different perspective on this stuff, because like I didn't identify with Cambridge that well, and I didn't like it that much. And then like I go back now and I'm like, oh, it's so like bland. It's exactly what they're singing about.
Yeah, and
in this album, where it's like, oh yeah, the consumerization, and I forget the term. Oh, the urban sprawl is just like, Yeah, it was kind of better before.
Yeah, and I also
It had personality before.
And I think the other thing that's sort of aging really well with this record is there's two topics on this record.
Yeah.
There's gentrification and there's financial instability. And I think that for millennials and I use the term loosely, but our generation, this idea of being 30 and not really fully knowing what we're doing, and we don't have the financial security of our parents. And I think this album really speaks really well to that. And it's insane to be like, that was what the thoughts were in 2002. And now it's 2019, the thoughts are the same. And you hear it the most in the first track on the album.
Man and Wife, the Former.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that opening verse too. It's very, like when I was in my early mid-20s and was working with my business degree and thinking about possibly going into sports writing, it's very much how I felt, kind of. And it's like, okay, well, here's the one path.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, it's laid out for you and it's obvious and it's what everyone else is doing. You know, that's the lyric that I led off with. It's night, but I can't stay asleep. But you do straight through till morning when you pour my coffee and say, baby, all that caffeine causes bad dreams where all your anxiety is unleashed. Well, lately my days are much better. I can't concentrate while I'm at work. I just think until my head hurts.
Oberst is so good at painting those pictures in his lyrics and always has been. My favorite lyrics in the album is in where he says, never mind the shit that I sing about because I'd sell my soul to buy a fucking house.
Adolescence made her an activist. Now she's the one who does all the lecturing. They got 18 holes. She knows the thing one more. The dream is dead. Won't eat their food or wear their clothes. Always wants to know where her money goes, but will shell it out for filling up her nose. So run it up, I'll run my mouth. Never mind the shit that I sing about, 'cause I'd sell myself to buy a fucking house.
A thing that I've always liked about Conor Oberst's songs is he's always very willing to admit when he's a hypocrite. Even like, I remember when I saw Bright Eyes on the Digital Ash tour, there's that line in, I think it's on Hit the Switch on Digital Ash, where he talks about how, I swear I'm going to stop drinking again. And then as he was singing that line at the show, he was chugging a bottle of Jack Daniels. And like, I think he's always been very good at reckoning with his own sort of hypocrisies that everyone carries, because no one lives entirely by their own creeds. And
he also kind of dialed it up intentionally. He told Interview Magazine in 2017, it's like an art project. It's like political punk, almost to the point of being cartoonish. That's the point of it. That doesn't really exist the way I feel like it should exist. And so I wanted to make it exist like that. So I think he's very aware that like some of this stuff is a little over the top, but that's the whole point.
yeah, and I think the band sort of was created in that way too. Like he said about looking back on the band, he said that it was kind of a perfect storm, a tight-knit group of friends who are all creative. We were all making music, but no one could imagine anyone coming in and discovering our bands or signing us. So the idea of us starting our own label and bands made a lot of sense. And then if you look at the roster of Saddle Creek, it's like,
Hit us.
it's just Kasher and Oberst bands. You know, you have Bright Eyes, Cursive, Lullaby for the Working Class, The Faint. They would grow and sign bands like Land of Talk and Rilo Kiley. And
Connor's solo stuff came out
solo
on it too,
stuff.
right? Yeah.
Eric Bachman from Archers of Loaf put out an album on there. So like they grew, but it was still very much like
The
this
family.
community. And like even with Rilo Kiley, like A Better Son Daughter is about her telling Conor Oberst to stop doing so much cocaine, I believe, or drinking or something. But like it's
One of the things
things he was doing. But it is like this tight community that just created a sound almost. It's funny to imagine. There's a video on YouTube of them playing a show in what looks like an Omaha community center and might be. And the crowd is like not into it. And I think it must be because like people would show up expecting the guy from Bright Eyes and then they'd get hit with this like emo core music. And it's like, oh, that's not what I was expecting. But anyway, the album was not very well received when it came out. It got a 4.6 from Pitchfork in one of the worst reviews. The review for this album on Pitchfork was written in the style of an email to the reviewer by a Conor Oberst fan, mad at him for not liking the album. So just to give you a sampling of this work of art,
no.
this is a direct quote from the review. And don't even get me started on Mitchum's music commentary, which ranges from describing the riff of Mall of America as a metalhead practicing scales in a guitar store to writing off Man and Wife the Latter as a less intelligent Zach De La Rocha fronting Puddle of Mud. You need to clean out your ears, wax man. Conor has said in interviews that Desaparecidos is all about the rock is all in capital letters, about playing loud music and sending an in-your-face political message. Just because a band isn't gazing at their shoes all day and playing their guitar through 38 effects pedals doesn't mean they're mongoloid metal, cock.
Wow.
The whole review was like that.
This wasn't an email he got. He
wrote his review in the style of
knowing what he would get in response to the bad review he gave it.
But it just comes off as, and like, I get the intention, but it just comes off as like pretentious and shitty.
Yeah. Also the like coming out of the gate of like, you're kind of telling on yourself that like you have a certain style of review, and like if you can assume that that's how people would respond, I think it's more a commentary on how people have responded to you and your work rather than Conor Oberst fans.
Absolutely true.
Now don't get me wrong, Conor Oberst fans are hardcore and probably send emails like that. I lived through JV Hive.
Yeah,
I lived through being called racist for not liking Andrea Bargnani. I know how hardcore the stands can get. I can only imagine what some of the stuff music reviewers receive is.
Yeah, and I feel like because this band was like intentionally abrasive almost, they also didn't care. In 2015, when asked about this review and about the reviews in general of the band, Oberst said, "For our sake, the nice thing is we didn't give a fuck back then, and we sure don't give a fuck now. This might sound conceited or something, but I realized a long time ago that with every record we put out, definitely all the Bright Eyes records, when we put them out, it feels like no one likes them, even our fans. We play shows and people want to hear the old songs, and I understand that as a music fan. You want to hear the shit you're familiar with. Well, when we came back 3 years later, it just happened to me the other day. I played a song off the People's Key at a show, and people erupted in crazy applause, and I was like, when I was on that tour and we played the whole record, everyone was thoroughly bummed every night. I think it just takes a while for people to get familiar with things, and I'd rather be on the side of the fence where people don't get or appreciate what you're doing at the time and then get it later, than something that's a flash in the pan and cotton candy. Sounds like fun for a minute, and then you forget about it." So I think he's looking at it the right way, and we've talked this too with Pitchfork sort of reevaluating stuff. That is kind of what it is, and I can see how this record specifically, which sounds very 2002,
yes.
And also,
like I said, Take It Back Sunday Brand New fits right in there.
Yeah, and is also just intentionally abrasive almost. That I can also see why the album didn't do very well.
Yeah,
like there's no single on this record, intentionally so. I don't know if you can even say it's like a hit, but I would say their most popular song was Greater Omaha.
Well, traffic's kinda bad. The widening easy street to fit more SUVs, to planting baby trees, to grow to shady peaks. A little shelter from the sun, or the upper tax bracket. Here on the cul-de-sacs, we're not giving back to the community. Repent, cause we can't afford to be generous. There's closing costs and a narrow margin. So go on your degree, and we'll take you out to lunch. You can work for us, but you gotta eat them all up. Yeah, one more mile for me, we'll be happy then. One more, yeah, one more, one more, one more. There's one more, just one more, just one more. There's one more.
You find it weird that his voice is like way more twangy on Better Oblivion Community Center than it was on Bright Eyes.
Totally.
Or Desaparecidos.
Yeah, he's playing into it a little bit, I think.
For sure. It's like, I don't know what to call it. It's like country emo, like Yemoha. I don't.
I like that.
Yemoha. I feel like that would be much better written out than it does.
Yes, but I like it. So the band, not a huge success, but not without their successes. On the tour we have mentioned on this show before, the Jimmy Eat World Promise Ring Tour of 2002, the opening band on that tour was Desaparecidos, which I did not know.
I didn't know either. I didn't even come across that when I was setting up that connection.
So they toured with them. They were also featured on an episode of MTV's You Hear It First. Oberst has said that the reception from Bright Eyes fans was a little mixed. He said, obviously they're entangled, but I think the kids that come to our shows, there's plenty of kids that are Desaparecidos fans that aren't necessarily Bright Eyes fans, and that's great. That's actually a testament to how much of a band we are, because we're definitely a band. I like that he has to clarify it.
By the way, we're a real thing.
We are 5 equal parts, and we get together and we make music together, and everyone has to be involved for it to sound the way we sound. And I think that resonates with different people than my other projects, and I think that's great. So they did develop quite a cult following, let's call it, especially because after this record came out, the band broke up. And as bands that release one record and then disappear for 10 years, often those cult followings happen. The band broke up basically because Oberst was getting too successful, more or less.
Yeah. So you're going to hate this.
Yes.
What Oberst did here was very much a wrestling trope.
Oh boy.
You have your thing, you're getting it established. What a lot of places will do is send their guys on excursion. You go, you get really into something Spanish or Japanese. In this case, he wanted to learn Spanish. You rebrand and you tweak your gimmick, and then you come back to your main thing, and you're ultimately the same, but you have these little tweaks to things. Conor Oberst went on an indie excursion into the punk scene. Then he came back, and
I like it.
Bright Eyes took off from there. This is in here just for Zeus. I think I brought up wrestling in 5 out of 10 episodes now.
I'm surprised it's not 10, to be honest. Yeah. Oberst has said that his heart wasn't in the band at the time. As we said, during their tour, he was recording Lifted and sending demos and masters back to, I think it was Mike Mogus who was producing it, while he was on tour with another band. Everyone else in the band was also involved in other projects, obviously not quite as successful. Denver Daily told Spin, it was bonkers how famous Oberst became and what was going on with Saddle Creek. The Faint back then, I think they had something like the largest offer in the history of Capitol Records, and they turned it down, but I can't remember why. I think they still kind of kicked themselves for that one. It was such a weird thing to have basically your first band out of high school automatically have a label and a booking agent, and then all these things are set in place, a publicist, to get the press that they did when they did, because the whole Omaha scene was kind of blowing up. It was a really odd thing to experience, and in some ways I feel like I didn't pay my dues until years after that. So Oberst obviously became stupid famous when Lifted came out. Daly went and launched his band Statistics. Landon Hedges, the bassist, was in a band called Little Brazil, who are fucking awesome if you haven't listened to Little Brazil. And then amongst the band members, the band became a joke. They would like make jokes to each other about reuniting.
Like, remember when we did that thing?
Exactly. In 2010, Fremont, Nebraska passed a law prohibiting the hiring of illegal immigrants. And so Conor Oberst decided to throw a benefit concert called the Concert for Equality to support the ACLU's legal fight against the law, and he reunited Desaparecidos for the show.
Cool.
Oberst said that the Concert for Equality worked, and the kids loved it. There was a ridiculous crowd, and it was fun. Oh, sorry, Matt Baum said this, not Conor. We raised a ton of money for a really good thing, and the law was struck down. And then the band disappeared again. Then in 2012, the band reformed again to protest Sheriff Joe Arpaio, which is always a good thing.
Yep.
They released a 7-inch single with 2 new songs, one called Maricopa. Maricopa, of course, spelled with the KKK in the middle of the song. And I believe, and Backcell was the other song, which is a great song. And then this time, though, the reunion stuck. They put out 3 7-inches in 2012 and 2013, which sounded very much like their band, but also much better produced and much fuller. One of the songs I put out was called The Left is Right.
Chain ourselves to the ATMs, make a mess. When we pitch our tents on the State House steps, now we're taking it, now we're taking it back, now we're taking it, now we're taking it back for the greater good. Goddamn Robin Hoods, fan the flames, serving cocktails down at the stock exchange, hear the screams. Take our baseball bats to the limousines. They'll be talking us, they'll be talking us up, they'll be talking us, they'll be talking us up to the journalists. If there's any left, you know the 60s proved that change is hit or miss. Every bloody pacifist concedes the truth. If one must die to save the 99,
So yes, in 2012, the band released Maricopa and Backcell, and then in 2013, they released Anonymous and Left is Right, and Te Amo Camila Vallejo, and The Underground Man. Connor said that the reunion was pretty easygoing. It wasn't like they had to come back or anything, so they definitely weren't popular enough for that to matter. He said, we have 2 songs, let's put out a 7-inch and play some shows. It was very organic like that. We weren't sure that we were going to make a full record. They would, however, make a full record. In 2015, they released Payola, which was the 6 songs from the 7 inches plus 7 other songs.
And it rules.
It rules. And it also is just kind of this podcast of like who plays on that record.
Yeah.
Like there's a guest, Tim Castro has a guest spot, Laura Jane Grace has a guest spot. It's just very much like, oh, you made a record for us? That's nice. Thank you.
They also did Seth Meyers, and Amy Poehler was on with dark hair, and I had no recollection of Amy Poehler ever having dark hair.
Really?
I was like, this is weirder than going back to Desaparecidos and seeing Amy Poehler with dark hair.
The band would do a tour. In 2015, I saw them at the Turf Festival in the middle of the day, and then they played a show that night at Lee's Palace, which Hopalong opened, and that show ruled because it was Hopalong and Desaparecidos.
Hopalong's so good live.
The album, I would say, is a lot more directly political, sort of what we were talking before, in that like it's also very 2015. You know, there's songs about the group Anonymous, Camila Vallejo, who is a Chilean Communist Party politician.
Yeah, a little less like the first album, you know, had a little bit more of like self-improvement to it mixed in as well. Oberst told MTV2, hopefully it doesn't come off as preachy and whiny. The refrain from Mañana of change each other, a lot of that is not on Payola. Payola is just straightforward.
It's a pretty angry record, I would say.
Which is cool. It's good. There are not the personal touches, I don't think that.
Yeah, and like the financials and like the hardships of life in 2015, it's not really about that, which is fine. And it's a great record. It's just very much a 13 years later record. Oberst said about the reunion, I didn't sit anyone down and go, you know what the world is missing? This. And we should be the guys to fill that void. But I think the completely live rock band is becoming more and more rare. Most bands out there have a lot of synth elements or backing tracks or whatever, which I love. I'm a huge fan. But I do think there's something about that old school live loud rock band, and it's great to see a resurgence of that. It's hard to remember bands that actually had a message and wanted to have real substance behind their lyrics and not just ruffle feathers in the right way.
We're going to talk about how Payola was received and what came after this.
So the band came back 2015 with Payola. Oberst said, the first time when we were kids, we didn't know what we were doing. It was total chaos. And now we have the perspective to actually do it right. And he has a great quote, which I love. He was talking to Dan Ozzi about how Desaparecidos were sort of intentionally loud and political to a cartoonish extent almost. And he said, if you can't laugh, you're going to cry. I've spent too much time crying, so now I'm into laughing, which I think is just a great quote from a guy like Oberst. The band continued to tour through 2015, and then on October 28th, 2015, Conor Oberst was hospitalized due to laryngitis, anxiety, and exhaustion, and the rest of the tour was canceled. And the band's been pretty much dormant since. Obviously, Oberst's career is still going pretty strong. He released numerous Bright Eyes records and solo records and all that, and this year...
And has a cult of Oberst, kind of.
He does have a cult of Oberst.
Not only to defend him, but also to like argue quite ardently about rankings. I was actually a little surprised though. I knew that they were pretty hardcore, but when I was curious if my Bright Eyes rankings lined up, and I thought that they would not line up super well, but mostly, at least with the Reddit community, is not far off.
I know for a fact that my Bright Eyes rankings don't line up.
Okay, let's not get into it too much, but what is your favorite Bright Eyes album?
Digital Ash is by far my favorite. I also really love The People's Key.
I'm Wide Awake It's Morning for me.
That's fair.
And that came up number 2 on a lot of lists.
Yeah, I assume that and Lifted are the two.
Lifted or The Story is in the Soil, Keep Your Ear to the Ground. Great album title.
Oberst, I would say, also put out one of the best records of his career with Phoebe Bridgers.
Quite early one morning, hit me without warning. I went to hear the general speak. I was standing for the anthem, banners all around and confetti made it hard to see. Put my footsteps on the pavement, start for entertainment, for season
That record's so good.
You want to talk about albums that feel custom made for Phoebe Bridgers, who my favorite albums of the decade was Stranger in the Alps, and then Conor Oberst from Bright Eyes is like, oh yeah, put those two together. And the specifics of the sound, at first I was like, wait, this isn't exactly what I expected, and then it grew on me so quickly that that album,
it's great.
Rules. So such a like
it is a Blake album. Like, for
it's
sure.
such as like them on Instagram together throughout the whole process was just so weird. It was like yeah, here's my folk dad.
So I think for our debate for this episode,
I don't think we need to debate tracks on the album.
No, and there's only 2 albums, so like
and then if we expand it to the entire Oberst universe, there are just way too many.
I think if we're going to do it quickly, I do think Payola is probably a better record than Read Music, but I think Read Music is more interesting.
Yeah,
both in context and in lyrics.
Yeah, the context especially of like, hey, I'm between the 2 breakout Bright Eyes albums and I did this thing on the side. Yeah. And I admit that I don't care about it at the time.
So I think instead, what we should do, as this is a side project that maybe isn't as well known, let's do our top 5 sort of, I guess just top 5 side projects. Our rules for this are very clear, as I laid out in an email to Blake.
I was still unclear on some of it, so forgive me if some of mine don't qualify.
To count in my brain, which is stupid, to count as a side project for this purpose, the main band has to be still active. So
right. It can't be something you stopped and then, you can't, it can't be your second band.
Yes, exactly. And like your first band can't have.
So Further Seems Forever and From First to Last don't count. Right. As much as we're definitely, at some point, I'm going to force us into before they were stars bands.
Yep. That's exactly my point. Yeah, yes, exactly.
That's a different thing. It wasn't a side project. It was like, I did this thing and now I do this other thing.
Yeah.
I don't know that Further Seems Forever is going to be worth a whole episode, but I'm definitely going to shoehorn it in. I think From First to Last is worth a full episode, and I'm going to shoehorn Further Seems Forever.
That's fair. I get that. So yeah,
no more specifics on that because I don't know that everyone knows what I'm referencing with those 2 bands, and
I hope they don't, and then they find out and they go, "What?"
Yeah, it's great. I'm a little torn on some side projects sometimes, and like I don't. Neither of these are on my list, so I don't know that they qualify. But also, like when a band breaks up or takes a break or someone does something outside of the band and it really is just the band still, but it's not the same name. Like John K. Samson is a Weaker Than's album. It's mostly the same people.
It's the entire band minus Stephen Carroll.
Justin Pierre's side project is a Motion City soundtrack album. With how anal I am and how organized I like everything, those ones bother me.
Yeah, I get that.
But I have some favorites that I brought.
Let's do it.
Okay, number 1, Slav Squat, which is a Latvian feedback distortion with the guitarist from Pup.
Oh, yes. They play the Transact sometimes.
Yes, they play at the Transact regularly.
I have seen a saxophone bleeding.
I'm a little worried. First of all, there's no way Steve listens to these podcasts, but I'm a little worried if he does, he's going to take Slav Squat as the name of his side project.
He's definitely going to.
One of my favorites. I don't have these in any order. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, neither do I.
Mos Def and Talib Kweli are Black Star. I wasn't 100% sure if it counts because
I think that counts.
Hip hop groups, you get into some weird. Everyone in Wu-Tang had a career. It's like the joke in Pop Star of like you can be in you can be in this band and also
in the Wu-Tang Clan.
Yeah, he was the RZA and also in the Wu-Tang Clan over and over. So Mos Def and Talib Kweli are Black Star is one of my favorites. I think that album is unbelievable, and like obviously Mos and Talib had very good solo careers. I'm not sure that either reaches the peak that our Black Star reaches. Plus 44, When Your Heart Stops Beating.
Man, we'll definitely do a Plus 44 episode.
So that is, for anyone who doesn't know, Mark Hoppus and Travis Barker did a little side project. It is, in my opinion, significantly better than Boxcar Racer. It's significantly better than Angels and Airwaves.
Yes.
As far as the Blink side projects go.
Plus 44, I believe, came out in their hiatus between the self-titled record and Neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Plus 44 is what I wanted Blink to sound like after the self-titled record and not the direction they actually went, even though I do like Neighborhoods.
You do like Neighborhoods.
But it's not what I wanted.
But yeah,
it's not the direction I wanted.
Plus 44 felt like a logical extension of, like a logical path to keep following down after you went the way you went on the self-titled.
Yes, which makes me a little disappointed that that's not what Blink's Sons Tom sounds like today.
To my earlier point about how I don't like when bands have a side project that could fit in the band discography. Yeah. Like that could, you throw a couple Tom verses on there and that's a Blink album.
Easily.
It's almost like a Blink softer B-side. It's like, hey, these songs were too like They're too not Blink.
Mark Hoppus listened to a lot of The Cure and then made an album. Is really what it is.
It's really good.
It is.
And like I think it's Hoppus's strongest songwriting.
I agree.
Especially compared to like the Blink stuff.
Blame It on My Youth.
Yeah. And the other one, I won't go as far as 5. Boy Genius, which is, there's some recency bias here, but it's Phoebe Bridgers, Julian Baker, and Lucy Dacus. It is hard, and it's only a 6-song EP, but it's incredibly good, and their live performance together is incredibly good. I guess this maybe qualifies as supergroup more than side project.
I think so.
But also, like, it is a side project for all 3 of them.
Yeah.
They're all still doing their solo stuff. So I wasn't sure if that one would technically qualify, but I wanted to mention it because it is the best.
Fair. The ones I've listed, I've Loose Fur is one, which was band of Jeff Tweedy, Jim O'Rourke, and Glenn Cochee, which famously they took the sound from their side project and just made Wilco sound like that. Yankee Hotel Foxtrot is basically just those 3 guys anyway, because Tweedy fired everyone else in the band and then Cochee joined Wilco.
So that one fits right in with what I'm saying. Like that's just a Wilco album.
Sort of, but not like
Yeah.
it's definitely what Tweedy wanted to do, and then was like, I'm just gonna do that with Wilco instead.
Yeah.
I also have the Falcon on there, who are a side project of Brendan Kelly from the Lawrence Arms, Dave Haas, and Dan Andriano from Alkaline Trio. Also could fall under the supergroup label. They have 2 records and they both whip ass.
Nice.
Sorry, Cassie. Another recency bias one from this year is Aaron West and the Roaring Twenties, which is Dan Campbell from the Wonder Years side project. It's really good if you haven't listened to the record from this year. It's basically what I want the Wonder Years to be. It's just like Americana, but with his voice.
Yeah, he's so good.
He's so good.
The last Wonder Years album, I really liked the first half, and I thought the second half just kind of fell
I
apart.
felt the same.
Sister Cities was the album we're talking about. Yeah, I gave it a listen, but I haven't really gone deep on it, which is surprising to myself.
I would thought you'd be
because
all over it.
Dan Campbell's my
It'll be on my 2019 list.
that's my guy.
The other 2 I have that we'll just touch quickly. One is Smidley, which is the singer of Foxing's side project. He just made this weird indie pop record last year, and I love it. And the other one, which is a band that I really want us to do one day, but I don't know if we'll get there. It's a band called The Sounds of Animals Fighting, which is a side project of like 9 bands, but mostly of the guys from RX Bandits and Anthony Green from Circa Survive. They have 3 records. One is like too weird for its own good. The other 2 are both really weird, but they're so good. And I hope we talk with them one day and they kick ass.
There are a few other ones that I'm sure people will be thinking in their heads, like Mars Volta.
Yeah.
It's like it's a little outside of
but they're exactly what I mean, and like they don't count because
Right.
the band broke up, and then I guess you could put Sparta on that list too.
Sure. Gorillas.
Yeah,
I guess
that's a good one.
For as much as Blur is still active or when they're active or whatever. One that I liked at the time, I can't really listen to it now. I just don't like it to go back to. Jack's Mannequin, like the Something Corporate side project. But then also he just like Andrew McMahon was Something Corporate, and then he did Jack's Mannequin, and then he did Andrew McMahon.
I never understood the delineation.
It's
there.
all like, I guess because maybe the band members aren't the same in Something Corporate, or there was something tied up in the name or whatever, but it's all Something Corporate.
Yeah.
It just
I also never got the sort of delineation there.
Yeah. Raconteurs is another one that's probably pretty popular.
Yeah. Or even doesn't he have another band too?
Yeah.
Dead Weather or whatever.
Stone Sour. It's, Corey Taylor's side one. I bring this one up because they ceremonially re-raised the Raptors championship banner at a recent show, City and Color.
Yep. Always a good one.
Yeah, they get these are all honorable mention that some of them are serious and some of them are less serious.
I'll leave it to you to decide which.
Which one of those did Fort Minor fall into? 100% reason to keep listening to this podcast is
he did just remix a Foxing song.
There you go.
So yeah, we've come to that time.
We gotta pick a song for the mixtape.
I think it would be Greater Omaha. I think it's the closest to the big song. Like when I saw them in 2015, that's what they closed with. Like their encore was a cover of Spanish Bombs by The Clash, and then they just did Mañana and Greater Omaha back to back. And
nice.
And I feel like a band like this, what they close with is probably their like what they consider to be like their signature song.
Also, we don't run into the issue we've run into sometimes where like, oh, the biggest song isn't a creative mixtape edition.
Yeah.
This is a good one. I also think it's a good snapshot of what the entire album is. Like you listen to that song and you get the point. You get what's going on here, what the album's about.
I think so too.
I am on board with that. I think Man and Wife, The Former is my favorite song on the album.
I think mine too, to be honest.
Greater Omaha gives you the idea. Now, I would have loved to
actually, you know what?
Had they stayed together, Man and Wife, The Former and Man and Wife the Latter, that angle of the album as its own album. Like had they stuck together and continued making records, I think there's a really good album there going in that direction. Obviously, Conor had bright eyes for that type of songwriting, but yeah. Why are you thinking a change right now?
I am, because I like that song more as well. I'm going to change it. We're going to do Man and Wife the Former.
Okay.
As far as supportive, he would have to support me financially.
I like a man that has money, that has goals in life.
It's night, but I can't stay asleep. But you do straight through till morning. When you pour my coffee and say, baby, all that caffeine causes bad dreams. Well, lately my days are much better. Can't concentrate when I'm at work. I just think and think till my head hurts of the pain. Plans I'm making, I just wanted to provide for you. But if you wanna make a run for it, my love, I'd cover you. And if you need money for bills, my lover, I could cover you. 'Cause I sell some shit I'm saving up. We can get the house next to the park. With the extra hours I picked up, we will pay for everything.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming on. We will talk to you next week.
Hey, please try the fish.